And we're now live. Okay, first of all, everybody, welcome to the Meld's inaugural Hangout. This is something we're going to probably be doing on a bi-weekly basis. And with recent events, we decided that this was a great opportunity to touch on some of the issues surrounding what the Google's acceptable linking practices are, and also what some of the communications issues that have popped up that have existed for some time. And a lot of people are thinking, myself included, they're getting worse rather than better. We want to try to touch on some of those things and try to bring a little bit of a note of reality to the situation. We're joined today by, well, first of all, we'll just go left to right here. Barry, if you'll introduce yourself real quick. Barry Moran.
Barry Moran, founder of the Meld, with Doc and Lee, and strategy director for Foundry Comms. Hello.
Lee.
Freelance automotive SEA consultant, partner of the Meld. Hello.
And Rand.
Hi, I'm Rand Fishkin, co-founder of Moz, co-founder of Inbound.org, co-author of Art of SEO, all-around SEO geek.
And Steve.
Steve Grenzer, Steam Driven Media, and just happened to get lucky and get drawn in because I have no idea what I'm talking about.
Fiverr for the win.
And I'm Doc Sheldon. I'm the editor on the Meld. Work over there with Lee and Barry. I do want to do a little bit of an intro on Rand and Steve. I don't think anybody here has likely ever heard of Rand before. Rand's been around for a while. As he said, he's a co-founder of the Moz, was CEO over there for a long time. He'd been involved with the web since '93 when he was in high school. He played around with Microsoft Front Page, building websites. And then in the '90s, he started doing some usability consulting for some firms in Seattle, banks and doctors and lawyers and whatnot. And he finally got involved in search marketing in 2002. He started learning by hanging out on a lot of the forums like many of us do. And after lurking for a while, he started participating more actively. And in 2004, he decided it was time to move from the forums to his own site, which eventually turned into the Moz. And he started sharing information, reports, tools there. He sat on his first panel at SES Toronto in 2005 and went on to speak at SES conferences in San Jose and New York. Then he authored Beginner's Guide to Search Engine Optimization. Right after that, he got featured in Newsweek magazine. Over the next few years, he kept writing, speaking, and influencing more and more every year, and the Moz has turned into quite an entity. So he's recently stepped down as CEO of the Moz, and Sarah Bird, who is his operations officer there for many years, has taken over as CEO. So he's stepped into more of an ambassadorial role as individual contributor, which hopefully means he'll have a little spare time to travel the world with his lovely wife, Geraldine, who many of you may recognize better as Everywhereist. Then we have Steve Gerichser. Steve has been in marketing for a couple decades or more, ever since he built his first website for the company where he designed and crafted custom jewelry back in '99. He managed their website for years and their marketing, and SEO naturally became a necessary part of his skill set. He's kind of a serial entrepreneur and an artist at heart. He does have a better understanding than most of the challenges of the startup companies because he's had many of his own. He's still active in the jewelry niche and is actively involved in animal rescue, along with performing a lot of SEO services for his clients. If that didn't tie up enough of his spare time, he's also a degreed architect, so he's designed and built his own home, which deserves probably a cover story on Architectural Digest. It's a fantastic place he's building down home in Tennessee, and if you ever see it, you will be green with envy.
Not to build a house.
In his spare time, he is an avid fisherman. He likes muscle cars, and he's rapidly become an expert on tractor repair. Thank you for that, Diane.
Yep.
I've known Steve since I first learned how to spell SEO, and he's taught me quite a lot over the last decade, and I'm sure I'll learn more from him before we're done. So, with the intros out of the way, let's touch on the recent issues. It started becoming more evident with the recent guest blogging fiasco, and which wasn't a surprise to most of us. Since about a year and a half ago, Matt's been dropping hints here and there that this was an issue, that guest blogging was getting spammy. Better be paying attention, cleaning this up. And about 6 months ago, he did it again. And then about a month ago, the hammer fell. And somebody, my blog guest, which was labeled as a blog network, although a lot of us would argue that it's not really necessarily that in the conventional sense, but they got hammered. My own site got hammered too, presumably because of some ties to them. A lot of other sites that had used their services or that had been contributors on their site got hammered, and it just created a real furor of FUD. Fear, uncertainty, and doubt was flowing freely. So I'd like to ask the panelists, Rand, what's your take on guest blogging and the effects it is having on generally acceptable link practices?
Yeah, I think it's one in a long line of practices that Google's chasing after. But I think in this particular case, because guest blogging is something that has non-spammy roots, right? The roots of guest blogging are in editorial contributions to other publications, and that's been around for centuries now. And the fact that Google is taking action against it with less of a fine scalpel than you would expect, especially the messaging that they've put out being so broad, shotgun approach, has felt really wrong and also very frustrating to, I think, a lot of people, even outside of the SEO and webmaster communities, who simply want to run their sites and live their lives and publish content and have relationships. And so I think that's where a lot of this big frustration around guest hosting, guest blogging in particular comes in. But Doc, you said something just a couple minutes ago that I'm really curious about. So you said your site had been penalized ostensibly because of a connection to the My Blog Guest platform, and so I wasn't sure where that had ended up. I'd seen the conversations kind of taking place over a number of days. Did you get confirmation from Google that that was the offending issue, or that there ever was an offending issue, that this wasn't just a mistake?
No, there were 5 separate issues on my site which could have potentially drawn my penalty. One was the fact, obviously, I had a page entitled guest posting, inviting people to submit. Okay, that can be a flag. Another was the fact that I have a member profile on my blog guest, because early on Ann asked me if I'd moderate over there. I've been off of that for a couple of years, but I do still have an active profile. When I say active, I do still have an existing profile over there. So that is a potential issue, because certainly they can see that. Then I also had a guest post, which Matt did respond to me saying this post, is low quality, and it had a anchor text in the profile, in the guest poster's profile, which was questionable. So
yeah,
no,
I saw that one.
Yeah,
okay.
he tweeted that, and I questioned
But
it.
Doc, the issue with that response was stating that content was nothing to do with the topic of your blog.
Right, and he was dead wrong about that.
Yeah, he was completely.
Yeah, he said it was totally questionable, which I called him on immediately, and he never responded to that. But I count myself lucky that I even got one response. So.
Yeah, I was going to say I did send a tweet his way. I think it was about a week and a half ago, and that tweet was picked up by a lot of other folks, but with no response. So I think what I asked him. I'm going to put it in the chat window here. But I had asked him about we editorially review content on UMoz, right? So Moz, much like you, Doc, or did, right, accepts guest posts. We put up virtually one a day. There's the link to the tweet. And have been doing so for many years. We do link back to the authors. Some of the authors use, anchor text of their choice somewhere in the post, right? They author the post. We carefully review them. We make sure there's no spammy stuff, right? We're very editorially careful about this and have been for many years. But, I was frustrated not to see a response, although I assume, my interpretation of no response is it's cool by us. The frustrating part about that is that seems to be, not how other people have been treated, and I don't. So I think this line is very unclear, and the lack of transparency from Google is what's causing so much of the frustration, so much of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that you're talking about.
Agreed.
I think something.
Yeah, I saw your tweet. I was kind of surprised you didn't respond.
Yeah.
Sorry for jumping in there, Doc. I think something I've noticed on Twitter, Matt kind of answers certain questions, but it doesn't reply, and it's almost as if it's just kind of teasing people, which is quite annoying, I think, for certain webmasters like yourself, Rand and Doc, or at least that's my interpretation. But I could be completely wrong. So.
You know what? I'm going to send him a follow-up. Any chance you might reply to this? I think lots of people would be helped in knowing the criteria for acceptable.
He can just drop a comment on his guest blog post on the Meld.
That's right. I mean, that was quite remarkable.
Well, you got the follow-up here of e-consultancy just yesterday or the day before decided they were just going to blanket no-follow everything.
Right.
And I'm of the opinion if you're going to put it on your website, why no-follow it? I mean, the whole point of no-follow was originally for advertising.
And user-generated content, right? It's user-generated content stuff that you don't control, you don't editorially approve, and it was specifically, mentioned that for editorial content stuff you did review, stuff you did put out, please do not put no follow on that.
When they first came out with it, they were very specific in saying it will never be used for anything else. It'll be used for advertising and user-generated content. And now it's being used for everything else, just like a lot of people predicted back then. It's out of control because now you have, I mean, quite frankly, legitimate websites like e-consultancy doing the no-follow just to be safe.
Right. Yep.
And when you're behaving in a manner like that because you're afraid of what Google might do to you in the future, it's really time to start reconsidering your relationship with them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's more like a flip and a hooker situation.
And the problem is, Steve, is the message that sends out, because you've got a reputable publication like eConsultancy, which should not, under any circumstances, be employing a no-follow policy across all their content. It's a complete debacle. That's trusted, editorially approved content from relevant authors going out to a relevant audience. And the message that then sends and perpetuates this FUD even further to mom shops who have got no idea what's going on, or they can't afford to bring in people like us or whatever else. For me, e-consultancy adopting that stance was just absolutely incredulous. And I know that Steve Plunkett took it upon himself on Twitter to start communicating with them and trying to educate them as to why this was the wrong move. But they're scared. They are scared.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, very honestly, internally at Moz, there have been a number of email threads going around our community and our marketing teams, and in fact the executive team as well, talking about, hey, what sort of risks are we exposing ourselves to, right? I mean, we have a business to run. We have investors and shareholders and people who, and 135 employees, right, who all depend on Moz doing a good job, and 26,000 customers too, right? And so us getting penalized by Google would be a very tough thing to overcome. Yeah. And we feel like we've done everything we can to be within their guidelines and to recommend white hat things over the years. Extremely cautious, I would say even overly cautious the last few years. And so this is one of those times where I put in my vote and said I think it would be wrong to start no following all of our all of our guest posts, all of our UMa's contributions, because we editorially endorse those. We believe them to be great content, and we want to see them receive the benefit of the contribution that they put in.
Right.
And I think every site should do that.
Well, then it takes me back in November. Matt Cutts was on Leo Laporte's This Week in Google, and Matt flat out said that his intention was to instill fear in certain types of SEOs.
Well, I don't actually. One of the weird things, Steve, I don't actually have a problem with that. I think it's okay to instill a little bit of fear, but what I think you need to do is be clear about what you should and shouldn't be afraid of. The lack of clarity is where the problem lies.
And when you have legitimate businesses like this now being in fear, you've crossed the line between trying to enforce a legitimate practice and to becoming a bully.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very tough to know how much of this, right, is, I think this is one of the challenges of Matt Cutts and his personal role at Google versus kind of his involvement with the company overall. It's very hard to know whether he gets together with, the entire search quality and web spam teams, and they sort of decide like, hey, we want to start sending these messages, and this is a tactic we want to take, or whether this is Matt sort of being like, you know what, I'm going to tweet at this guy because I feel this way or that way today, and that's a very hard thing to handle as a as a webmaster, as a professional in the field. And we are trying to do what Google wants us to do. They just need to tell us what that is.
A certain level of transparency would be really nice.
Supposedly, transparency is a core value at Google. I would love to see them live up to it.
I don't see it at all.
Yeah, I mean, if this is their transparent mode, I'd sure hate to see them being obscure. It's and I think you make a great point, Rand. It's if they can't tell us what they want, how in the world do they expect us to help them achieve the goal? Yeah, and that's that is what good SEOs should be doing is actually helping both content producers and web producers, as well as Google, and information seekers and information producers to find each other and to connect. And I think that's a beautifully, a really wonderful goal that we have and that we can help and have helped with over the last decade and a half of Google's lifespan. But we just need them to come a little further on that clarity piece. Yeah. Well, it's just making the situation worse, and now, with things like e-consultancy, now, this would be a discussion that the three of us would have to have on the Meld, but at some point, we're going to have to make a decision. How are we going to handle linking? My personal opinion is I have no intention of voting for going no follow on everything. That's just, to me, is ridiculous.
Yeah.
No, won't happen. Won't happen.
But we certainly do have to be cautious.
But the thing is, though, we've got we are completely at the other end of the spectrum from Moz, but we've got a good group of people who are contributing good content there. You're the editor, making sure that everything's there, and there's no links going out from our site to any other site that could be questionable at all. But we don't have the volume, and I think the volume aspect of the amount of links is where they're getting a little bit distorted when they're trying to algorithmically determine some sites. And obviously the amount of UGC content that Rand's got on Moz, for example, then from a machine learning perspective, that would trigger boxes left, right, and centre. But again, the Moz team have got a group of editors who keep that content really tight. Okay, if someone wanted to really nitpick, they could probably find a few posts in Moz over the years that could be questionable. But we've got to get real here. I take Rand's point exactly, that he's got a business and a community he's got to look after, and that's why that question needs answered. But I take great distaste in what e-consultancy have done. I think they're setting a really bad example for publishing companies, websites in general, taking that blanket stance.
Yeah, I agree. And it sends a signal, their actions sends a signal to a lot of folks out there, a lot of publishers, bloggers and smaller site owners too, saying, my God, if e-consultancy is doing this, we better too, which I think is just very counterproductive.
It's the FUD being perpetuated, and with no follow. That's, as we all said, advertising is what we're all kicked off. You do not trust the site that it is going to. If you've got editorial content, why would you have an untrusted link within that editorial content? It just doesn't make sense.
Right. Yeah, Barry. To me, the decision for editors seems clear, right? If you're e-consultancy, and we have exactly the same challenge at Moz, right? So if I'm running UMoz, my response is, if we don't believe our editorial quality and guidelines are good enough, we should improve them, or we should say we no longer accept guest posts. The wrong move is to say we're still going to accept content. We still believe in showing this to visitors and in trusting these writers. We just don't trust them when it comes to Google, and that's really breaking the web's connections.
Exactly.
You're losing the property that you are supposed to create when you give trust there.
It sort of violates that whole right for visitors instead of search engines rule, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. You can't violate one of Google's guidelines. You can't acquiesce to one of Google's guidelines without violating another. That's a big challenge.
Yeah, it's kind of a catch-22 situation.
So, I mean, tell me, gents, like, when you think about this, how do you consider the what a marketer should be doing to react and respond to this? Because I've had a personal challenge of recommending to people who write to me, hey, I have been contributing editorially, and writing is one of my strengths. That's something that I do for my brand. How do I continue to do that in the right way?
Well, that's a good question, because I think we need to touch on the so-called acceptable practices. Do we now go to nothing but raw URLs? If we're going to follow something, does it need to be a raw URL only? And even then, if it's in, I don't have any confidence that a raw URL in your author bio as a guest blogger on my site is going to protect me if your site is questionable.
Right.
If it's a followed link, raw URL is not going to be adequate to protect me from any kind of a backlash. So,
Or even if the website's acceptable now, what's to say in 3 years or 4 years from now it's not?
Exactly. He could get hacked. He could take on a new partner, or it could change hands, or just get lax in his methods, and suddenly it's a bad neighborhood, and you're following links to it.
The ability.
That's the other thing that creates an awful lot of issues with people is, okay, you said that this was an acceptable practice, and I started doing it. That was 2 years ago. Now you're saying it's an unacceptable practice. I've stopped doing it. And tomorrow you penalize me for what I was doing 2 years ago when you recommended it.
Right.
Come on.
That's an issue with their ongoing, ever evolving guidelines. I mean, we can all remember the day when they used to say, go out and get in better directories, go out and link to other websites. And now those exact same tactics will get you in trouble, even done at a small scale, as evidenced by your blog. I mean, does anybody realistically think 4 or 5 links were enough to penalize your whole website? I mean, that's ridiculous.
I had one that Matt called out. One link on the entire site.
Boy, if that's the litmus test, we are all in trouble.
Yes.
That's it.
For my clients, I always deal on the assumption that we're dealing with thresholds of any sort of a potential penalty. There's some sort of a threshold. The other assumption is that once you have gotten a penalty, your thresholds for you are lowered.
Yeah.
So now you're kind of on probation. You've got to behave yourself even more. Okay, I think those are reasonable assumptions. But now, to say that, you've got 458 links, ooh, you just got a bad one. Now you no longer show up for your site's name, for Christ's sake.
That's
The thing is, though, I mean, over the years, we've all discussed as well where negative SEO sits in the realms. Everything that they've done, all of the FUD that they've created, and the position that they've now put themselves in with the changes that they've made and ousting of blog networks, etc., it makes negative SEO an even bigger reality. But they won't come out and admit that. If you were so inclined, it would be easier to target sites to have that type of activity going on, and sites are going to pick up penalties because of it.
That leads directly to that Twitter comment that I just dropped in the chat room, where somebody basically got a blackmail email saying, "Give us $40 and we'll give you these really good links. Don't give us $40 and we'll give you these 10,000 really bad links. Your choice." I mean, how do you react to that? And of course he fired it off to Matt and then said, "Well, what do you think, Matt?" And Matt's like, "Well, we'll look into it."
Yeah.
You better do more than look into it. Because if somebody can fire a bench drummer and take a website out, we've got problems.
Exactly.
But didn't Matt say recently, don't worry about negative SEO?
Yeah, it's a very rare occurrence.
It is extremely rare. So I've talked to a bunch of people about this. I was actually at SMX Munich a couple weeks back, and we had a big panel discussion in front of 1,200 German SEO folks, and they had a very interesting perspective, which was that many of the folks in the audience on the panel commented that in English they have seen almost no negative SEO successfully work, with an exception, and that exception is if you're doing some shady stuff already, negative SEO seems to be a great way to tip Google off to that, right? So you see that your competitor is doing a little bit of gray hat, black hat stuff, buying some links, whatnot. You can point a lot of bad stuff at them, and it seems that Google will then sort of take notice of all the things they've been doing. If you have a very sort of completely white hat site, even a very early stage one, and I personally done some tests around this, right, with sites that are virtually brand new that have very, very few, fewer than 100 linking root domains to them, launched in the last 6 months or less, and I've invited spammers from Black Hat forums to go crazy, and they have. There was one where I think they got a good 400,000 unique links pointed at this, and didn't do anything. Right? Seems to had no effect, positive or negative, on the rankings. But what I did hear from a lot of those folks in Germany is that the further outside of Google Web Spam team's focus areas, meaning the U.S., UK, Australia, Canada, you get, right? And in Western Europe, it's a little tougher. But Eastern Europe, you start getting into the Mideast, you start getting into North Africa, start getting into East Asia. A lot of these negative SEO practices are much more real and do work. And I don't have evidence to that fact, but I do trust what I heard from the audience, and I want to try and validate that. I hope that Google is also listening to those things, right? Because I recognize they have clearly done a pretty darn good job of keeping negative SEO extremely hard to achieve here in the United States and in the English language speaking world. Outside of that, though, tough to say.
The whole problem with the negative SEO is, how can you tell the difference between negative SEO and just bad SEO anymore?
It's difficult.
If I can understand if you get a 20,000 link dump over a week, okay, that's probably somebody doing negative. But if somebody were to set up a structured link building plan aimed at your website over the next 6 months or so, there's going to be no way that Google can tell the difference between those two things, because you have no control over it. And since they go back historically and when they apply these penalties, they're all inclusive of the entire history of your website. How do you clean something up when they don't even give you the tools to look at the history of your website anymore? Yeah. I mean, the link list in Webmaster Tools is pathetic.
Yeah, that's not going to cut it.
For the cleanup. It's a starting point, but if you're doing a legitimate cleanup, you're going to have to spend real money to go out and buy somebody else's tool and hope their tool gives you enough information to get it solved. And that's assuming you did it to begin with.
Yeah.
Well, I have two clients right now that came to me, new clients that came to me professing to be victims of negative SEO, and with both of them I said I doubt it because I really believe that it is a rare thing, and both of them turned out to in fact be negative SEO.
Hmm.
So, and I'm not a big player. I mean, I've got like 7 active clients, so it's.
Right.
I figure if I've got 30% of my client base is a victim of negative, that doesn't necessarily correlate to 30% of the bad link cases being negative SEO by any means. But it does tell me that maybe it's not quite as rare as I was assuming. And they're both English-speaking markets.
It's
So,
definitely it's definitely rearing its ugly head more and more, and where more exposure has come from some of the penalties that some companies have got, then there's more and more unscrupulous people willing to do it and willing to attack. And then just picking up from something Steve said about, we've all been involved in forensic SEO for a long time and from cleanups. There was a Twitter conversation I was involved in about, I don't know, a month ago, 6 weeks ago, because there was a well-known SEO agency who are saying, you don't need to remove any links. All you need is webmaster tools data and just disavow it. That's all you need to do. That'll get your penalty lifted. And again, it's more of this misinformation that gets put out into the arena that people pick up on. A lot of the time, what was it Matt said, SEOs can't have anything nice because they ruin it. A lot of the time, SEOs ruin it for themselves by just perpetuating absolute BS.
Yeah, I think the negative SEO issue is something that we should spend more time on, and it's actually one of those areas where I do believe that if we, the community, can show some significant examples that get picked up by greater press outlets, that Google will take action and that they'll work on those things, because they don't want to have techniques and tactics that are publicly available that could potentially harm other people's websites. I think that would be a true detriment to the quality of their engine, and a big hit on public perception as well. And I don't think they're willing to tolerate either of those.
Well, I know, obviously they've improved the systems in place quite a bit in the last 5 years, whatever. But I know as far back as 6 or 7 years ago, we were able to knock out websites that were reasonably new with reasonably small link profiles and blow them clear out of the index at will.
I remember that, yeah.
And we went on, and the discussion on WebPro World went on for months. And it finally got to the point where people wouldn't believe us unless we showed them exactly how we did it, exactly with what links we used. And we weren't willing to do that because that would have let the genie out of the bag as far as the tactic we had discovered.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's been the challenge is...
We got to the point where it's like, you're either going to trust us and believe us or you're not.
Yeah.
And ever since then, I've never felt confident that they had resolved this. And the fact that they're using so much fear now to get people to go back and clean up their link profiles leads me to assume that they do have an issue with this. And the only way to fix it is to get people out there and basically reset the internet back to zero using a new set of rules that Google can control.
Well, I mean, this speaks to the evolution of their ranking signals, and I was of the belief until recently that they had been, turning down a lot of the weight of links in the algorithm as they had been turning up other things. I still partially believe that, but I have seen a number of examples. We've been doing some testing recently with anchor text, and it feels like 2006 SEO in a lot of ways still, right? You point just a few domains with exactly the right anchor text, that something that's ranking number 20, and you can move it to number 1, pretty darn quickly, as long as the results aren't hyper competitive. And that is very surprising to me. I had expected a little bit more from them, and I think they do have more intelligence, more insight when it comes to more popular queries, when it comes to queries where they have more history, where they have more brand and usage data signals, where they have more social signals. But in those, in that sort of mid and long tail of the web, I think there is still a very classic, old school SEO tactic that a set of tactics that works really well.
There's a whole array of verticals and a whole array of tactics that still work well, and they're also from the you were saying turning up the waiting signals and turning some things down. There has been a shift recently as well. The testing bed's too early to kind of say, but a small number of links from hilltop sites are having a big impact over an array of links from even very vertical specific sites. Trusted, verified, been around for a while, good sites, but those 1-2 links from that hilltop are having a huge boost. And depending on the vertical that you're in, you can make things pop pretty quickly, and it does feel rather old school.
Yeah, it's almost like trying to get back in DMOZ, in the old days. If I could just get my site in DMOZ, I know I could rank for this. It's a little bit how I feel about Hilltop.
DMOZ and Yahoo directory for the win.
Yeah, I have a funny story for you guys. So I actually, this was maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. I assume I can talk about it. I don't know. I didn't sign anything, so I'm guessing I could talk about it. So I emailed the guys at AOL and said, hey, we're Moz, you own DMOZ, we should own it. Like, we should let us take that over, right? Like, we can do a much better job than you're doing with it. And long story short, it ended up not working out. They wanted far more than I think the site is worth for it today. But seeing the degree, it took a long time for anyone there to be able to figure out who even owned or controlled it. And I think, this is my guess, I think there's like a sysadmin in Oklahoma who basically runs the entire site, and that's like his one job, and he's very overwhelmed. And AOL is just like, you sit in your basement and take care of DMOZ and let the world burn. So thank God it's not DMOZ specifically. But yeah, Barry, to your point, I think it is the case that some of those hilltop, right, the sites that have that link to a lot of the most important sites that have a lot of authority are the ones that get a lot of that value. And so, the ability of an SEO today to be able to do business development forms of outreach is just, that's a superpower in our field.
I just emailed a client this morning, giving them a whole offline strategy. Just because they're specifically targeting local. Yeah. And we had she's a real estate agent, and when you're a real estate agent in a broker's office, it's really hard to perform well in local because you're seen as Century 21. You're not seen as that individual broker. So, we went through and did all the technical things for her website and all the little stuff we can do. And then I gave her a complete offline strategy she hadn't even considered that would tie back eventually to her online strategy. So run with this, build your business.
Yeah.
And when you get your own office, then we can start to work and help you locally. But until then, here's the other options. Let's look at these.
Yeah, and I think that actually speaks a little bit to how Google has been evolving, with the rest of the web, because one of the things that they want to do is reward brands, reward real entities, right, and not and disable a lot of what very old school SEO used to be, where the six of us, right, would sit in our houses and build 20 different websites targeting 20 different verticals and
microsites.
Yeah, microsites, right, and bulk translate content from here to there and there to here and back again and throw that up and rank for whatever we wanted because we knew kind of the tricks of the trade.
And unfortunately, apparently Google has not allowed the industry to evolve. It's still holding current industry professionals to the content that was created 5 years or 6 years or 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's not let us evolve as an industry. It's holding our past against us. Even if you've completely cleaned up the way you do business now, what you did 8 years ago is still going to haunt you forever.
Well, that brings up an interesting point. I think that what I'd kind of like to pursue a little bit. First of all, anything that Google tries to get us to do as a whole, they obviously are trying to do it for a reason. They have a goal. They're trying to achieve something, and they're trying to get us to work in that direction to aid them. For instance, well, just a couple of my personal theories. G Plus was never a social media platform in the Mountain View mind. It was an information harvesting platform. Okay, it's become a hub for harvesting a lot of data about entities, and it has the ability to function as a social media platform to a degree, but it's the hub of their data. So, I feel that's their goal. They're trying to get us to work in that direction, which my natural resistance then tends to make me want to pull back a little bit. But damn it, it's a handy platform, so I like using it. I think that a lot of things to me point to the fact that they're trying to force us to do something that they can't readily do, clean up the link graph. Because they can't just arbitrarily select links and no longer heed them in the graph without calling into question the reliability of the graph as a whole. However, we can. And I think that is a major goal on their part, which kind of leads me to think that links, as you were saying earlier, Rand, are intended to eventually at least become a much smaller contribution as a ranking signal.
Yeah.
He's came out and admitted that they won't be able to follow the Yandex model, and they won't be able to move to an algorithm anytime soon that doesn't have links at the core of it. I think that they do want to devalue those signals, and even that's the nodes that it was all based on, sharing information, they're trying to devalue it because they don't trust themselves and they don't trust us.
Yeah, well, I think that probably what they want to replace links with in terms of ranking factor is eventually authority. But they need to have one hell of a database built before they can make that transition, and they're not there yet. I doubt that they're even 20% of the way there. They're probably less than 10% of having enough scale available to them.
With the infrastructure change, Hummingbird, the ability that they've got with knowledge graph, how they're now interpreting entities, the fact that they can tone it up a bit and they can understand the social signals, not inherently using them or implicitly using them, but they understand them. I think they're, I personally believe that they're further than 20% of the way there.
I mean, I certainly would say that going in the direction of, if I'm advising anyone on marketing strategy, I'm telling them they have to diversify those signals. Like they've got to be playing the game 5 and 10 years ahead, because I don't feel confident that I know how far away Google is from being able to turn down those links and those anchor text. I know they want to, and they have got just an incredible supply of cash, people, brand equity, everything that you would need as a company to be able to make those investments. So I don't want to bet against them too readily.
That's it. I mean, I think if they could turn it off tomorrow and still return the right results to the users, they would do it.
They'd do it.
But they can't do it. But it depends on where they get. But you're right, there needs to be a diversification, and that's what I discuss with every one of my clients. And like Steve was saying, Steve's given someone a rounded business strategy, giving them the right information to go away, and then come back and see them when they're in a position to do it. But I mean, there's always been snake oil people in this industry that will just try and push something over the line, and they'll try and push that little mom and pop shop down a specific road, and this reliance on the beast that is Google. But I don't care if you're bricks and clicks or what type of organization you are, if you have got a reliance on Google and organic for 50% of your traffic, you better be in a glass house. But you better start diversifying now, because if you don't and you're not, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And I was in an enviable situation when I got my penalty because I don't depend on Google for even 0.1% of my business.
Mm-hmm.
It's all word of mouth and referrals. So I had the luxury of not giving a damn. I just wanted to do something fast and see what would happen, so I disavowed absolutely everything. They say disavow links to, excuse me, not disavow, but no follow. I no followed everything. And they say to no follow anything to a site you don't trust. Well, top of my list was all Google properties. Okay, but I no followed everything, and it immediately got cleaned up. Took 4.5 days after I submitted my recon request, and it was approved. So, but how many folks out there are in that situation? Anybody that is depending, like Barry says, and Steve's been beating this into my head for years. Diversify. You know, if you've got a major portion of your business dependent upon any single source, like Google or any other, then you have a vulnerability. That's your Achilles heel. If you lose that, if you can't afford to take that percentage hit to your income, then you better spread it out. Now, there are limits. You know, maybe you can get down to 20 or 30%. You know, but even that, at least that's survivable.
Yeah, I think the exceptions to that are email and direct. Right, direct and type in, because I think those are completely owned channels. You just control them yourselves. But you know, that said, nobody. I don't know many people who have 60-70% email or 60-70% direct. You know, we're all playing the social game, the referral game, the Google game.
And that's, well, like Doc and Barry were saying. I mean, I've always had, having come from meat space before internet. You know, anytime one source of revenue gets above about 30%, I start to get nervous.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when we built websites, we used to tell people, no, we don't want to push and rank #1 for everything right away. We want to work into it, get your search up to here, then find other revenue sources, and just keep steadily building a solid business so that if one or the other should fall, you don't get wiped out. And
yeah.
And it happens all the time.
That diversification actually, I think, helps with some of the newer signals that Google is taking into account. Like I have seen some very interesting examples of sites that have not done well on the linking front, even on the accessibility front have done poorly, but because so many people type in their brand name associated with the keywords that they're looking for, Google has sort of mashed those together and said, you know what, whenever anybody's looking for Pittsburgh criminal defense attorney, I bet they're looking for this guy, because that's what everybody's searching for right now, and that's what's hot, and that's what the media is talking about, and it doesn't matter that he doesn't have a website, and there's no keywords in his title tag, and he doesn't have any links.
Link to his Yellow Pages listing.
Yeah, yeah.
His Google Plus listing, Steve.
Even better.
The Google Plus listing we created without him knowing about it.
I want to jump in here real quick because I know Rand needs to step out very quickly.
Yeah.
And I'd like to get some actionable items for our listeners. Rand, if you could jump in there, and then we'll let Steve take a shot at it.
Yeah, I think
in terms of how to set up your linking, what is a wise practice for folks as we watch these things unfold?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's a good question, Doc. So the way that I think about this is from the broadest strategy piece first. So we talked about diversification. The beautiful thing about diversification is when you do it, when you start investing in things like social and things like content marketing and things like email, in local, in offline, you will find that some of these lead directly or indirectly to also earning links. When you find the ones that lead to links, I think that's when you find a really valuable link building methodology. And for every business is going to be different, but I'll give you an example for myself. So one of the things that I've seen is that as I contribute content to our industry and other industries, many people seek out my advice, and then that turns into things like interviews and speaking slots and invitations to contribute to webinars like this one, which Doc generously organized, and those lead very often directly and often indirectly to links and coverage, and that's a really beautiful virtuous cycle, right? And Google is never, in my opinion, never going to take away the value from saying, hey, inbound conference in Boston, we don't want you linking to Rand Fishkin's profile when you invite him to come speak. That's always going to work. it's always going to work, right? So same thing holds true if you produce some. My cousin in Pittsburgh actually is a criminal defense attorney, and he produced a video that was kind of funny, very well regarded, picked up by the media, and all these media sites, as a result, linked over to him, right? And all of those were indirect. And he's not a marketer, he's not an SEO, he didn't even have a website when he launched the video, which I gave him a hard time about. But those indirect signals, those indirect links, are the kind that you earn and the kind that I think Google will always value.
Okay.
Very much.
Steve?
Well, I mean, one of the things we've always tried to do, and it seems to...
I'm sorry, guys. Thank you so much for having me, too. I really appreciate it. Take care.
Very much appreciate it, mate.
Yeah, you guys rock.
Cheers, Rand.
Cheers.
All the best.
I have to make you a regular.
No, as I was saying, one of the things we'd like to try to do, and actually there's a couple of, I can get real specific if you want, is to try to help our clients present themselves as the expert in their industry, which, as Rand said, leads to speaking engagements, leads to being interviewed. The hard part is positioning them as the expert in a way that isn't very snake oily. You don't want to write a bunch of articles, I'm the best because. You actually want to go out and be the best. And that could be a challenge for some clients because either you're dealing with a really large corporation, which is tough to find somebody to be the voice or the expert in that industry, or you're developing or working on the other end of that spectrum where it's just one guy who's just working really hard to put food on the table and doesn't have time to go out and be the expert. But being able to find a way to help them achieve that goal first is a great way to help them develop not only links and support from Google, but it also generates a lot of outside influence, which helps balance that. Another thing that we've obviously, because I'm involved pretty heavily in the charitable side of things, I've discovered that when you go out and help these charities, most of them don't, all they would do is want your money. Plain and simple, write me a check, go away. But you will always find one or two that really appreciate what you're doing. And you can use that to work together, where you're cross-promoting each other, where, let's say, you're helping the elephant sanctuary in Tennessee, and so you're promoting them, telling people how to contribute to help more elephants, blah, blah, blah. And then they, in turn, on their website say, these people are really great, they help us a lot. If you buy this from them, then we're going to get more money. And you start working these types of relationships outside of regard of what Google thinks of them, to where you're cooperating with other businesses, complementary businesses, or businesses you wouldn't even think were complementary but could be, where you're cross-promoting each other, sharing each other's customer base. That evolves itself on its own naturally into generating more social experiences on Facebook and Google+, and generates more people talking about, how much you're helping each other. There are just so many ways that you could be doing link building that don't involve going out and writing an article and dropping an article somewhere.
Yeah.
The problem is getting a client to understand it and settle in for the long haul, because this is not something they can say, I need 400 links by the end of the month. That's not how this works.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is people have still got this fixation on numbers.
Exactly.
And it's still about quantity over quality. The people need to take a step back from it, and they need to understand that this is very much about less is more. Right link is going to have a damn sight more positive impact than 100 mediocre type links, and the strategy should be that it's about an authoritative position in it. And you're right, Steve, it's about mining relationships, right, and how you can be a little bit creative in what you're doing. But to pick up on what Rand said before he left, in that going to an event, that leading to being it picked up and these links coming in naturally, etc. Yeah, we all want to be generating a stance within a vertical for our clients so that they get these natural links. But one of the things that we need to be cognizant of now is keeping an eye on every single one of those links that matures to a site, because people out there will link naturally, but linking naturally has now become unnatural. What happens if that person has used that exact match anchor text? No,
Yes.
we want your link, but we don't want like that.
So who would have thought we'd come to a day where exact match anchor text was a bad thing? It's like the core of what PageRank started out as. And now that has become, we want you to do that, but if you do it too much, you know,
Yep.
I just, and it's, you know, as an industry, we're our own worst enemy because so many people in our industry have this philosophy that if one is good, 1,000 is better.
Yeah, exactly.
And the only way to scale certain things is to go to crap.
Well, it's 53 for the win. 53 links for the win in one single piece of content. You know, like Matt's interview. You know, that's the model that we'll want to follow. Okay.
Well,
That's a major fiasco there, because basically coming in the wake of all of the other crap that went on in the previous week and a half, to show that as a presumably acceptable standard, you know, do it this way and you'll be good. Good Lord, Matt, what were you thinking?
Doc, the thing is, right, that piece of content as it was created on that site isn't out of sync with any other piece of content that's on that site. That guy's done that for every single person that he's interviewed, that number of links.
Exactly.
The issue is that it was Matt. And how that site's never had a goddamn penalty, I don't know. But Matt tweeted that. I mean, Jesus, did he not read it before he tweeted it and then thought, I'm going to get so much for this. If I'm going to get more for this, tweeting this, than I am for tweeting Doc about Hispanic content on his site.
yeah.
Yeah, I got to imagine that maybe he had one of those dull moments, you know, after he hit enter, because, you know, Matt's generally pretty darn careful about what he says, about what he does. You know,
Yep.
Much more than most people, especially including myself. But for him to have tweeted that at that point in time was just unbelievable.
How do you legitimately create a litmus test? Can you point to his guest blog post and say this is an acceptable way of doing things from now on? Obviously not.
Yeah.
So I don't know, guys. It's the whole industry's crazy, and I'm gonna, you know, I don't know, dig a hole and go back to painting or something.
how not to do architecture?
I would love to, but that's a real hard industry as well.
But that's the thing. It's like, you know, I was just talking to another SEO the other day who was feeling a little bit despondent with sort of the way everything is at the moment. You know, and he was kind of struggling because he's trying to explain the situation to his clients, and then his clients are saying, "Yeah, but just get me links, just get me links, just get me links," because a lot of the psyche out there is still that that's all they want and that's all they need. And when people see, you know, Fiverr ads running on PPC, getting you 1,000 links to your site, it's just like, God help me.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's worrying quite as well, Barry, that I'm coming across, I mean, I do some sort of freelance work as well as working at the agency. And yes, I mean, I know, like Rand mentioned earlier about maybe going to these conferences and you're going to get links from there, etc. But what happens when you're a small business, a small local business where you don't have a big budget to do offline marketing, so you're not getting in the press, you're not going to events? What do you do in that instance? You know, because this is where the real challenge is, where if you're working with a big brand, yeah, you're going to get those mentions, you're going to generate those organic links naturally, but these small local businesses who are dependent on Google, a lot of them are depending on what they do to drive traffic to their website, that they're not going to be able to rank because, again, all they know is to go out and pay but a couple of £100 to some cowboy who's going to buy them links off Fiverr, and they're eventually going to get their website penalised, you know. So
you're right, and that, you know, that's what Steve was saying about sort of trying to get people sort of thinking. And the problem is that if you try and mine these relationships and you try and do different strategies, it takes time, and time costs money. And a lot of these people don't have the money to invest for our creative thinking, our strategic thinking, our relationship building to get that.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have the money all the time.
They don't have the budget all the time, and those people are going to struggle. As far as other smaller businesses concerned, I've got a couple of small local businesses run by friends, right? Mm-hmm. So I've helped them out here and there to do things a little bit creatively, just to try and because they don't have the budget to put to the money. And the best thing for those little companies is to keep an eye on the news. Now, to do news jacking, if you want to call it that, it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be expensive. It can be quick and it can be effective. And the exposure that a really small business can get from one single story can be really effective. The difference is, and this is what most small companies don't do, is they don't think about next. So they don't join up the dots on how they can live off that and how they can follow up to different events or different stories, or they can do a follow-up to it themselves in 3 months or whatever else and milk it for all that it's possibly worth. But these sort of small companies keeping an eye on what's happening in the news and doing it right, you've got to be careful, because they don't want to screw up their brand, or the brand that they're building, but at the same time, they can be clever.
Yeah.
I've mentioned this in the past. We had a client back years ago when the first big economic meltdown was happening, and there were a lot of articles about the white hot center of the economic meltdown happened to be in the county where we lived, and the president was talking about it. Every news agency was talking about it. We had national news descending on our county, going on and on about how badly we were getting wiped out by the downturn in the economy. But the specific business I was working with was actually doing better during this downturn. So we turned around and we took that phrase, the economic meltdown, the white hot center, and turned it around into how to be successful during an economic meltdown, and then turned around and fired off that press release to those very specific people who were in the process of saying it was horrible, so that we could get them while they were still in town. Mm-hmm. And got tons of print, radio, TV exposure because we reacted very quickly, and the client was willing to spend the money it took to write the right press release and get it in front of the right people quickly. And it turned out to be a huge boost for us, nationwide. So, being like you were saying, Barry, keeping an eye on what's going on in the news and finding a way that your business not necessarily relates or complements to it, but opposes it. Because that's the big thing about news and reporters, is they want to get both sides. And if you can be the other side without harming your brand, you can really leverage that into something very huge.
The other side is the great position to take. It's the best position to take. But you're right, you've got to do it in a way that doesn't harm the brand.
That's why me and Terry get along so well, because, we're definitely the opposite sides on a lot of things.
Listen, we're coming up on the hour. I think it's time to wrap it up. I really want to thank you, Steve and Rand, for your time and your availability. It's been a good discussion. There's a lot of uncertainty out there, and I think a lot of SEOs are contributing to it. Google is certainly contributing to it, and everybody is a little nervous and scared about everything that I'm doing. I've been trying to be white hat and follow the webmaster's guidelines, and all of a sudden I'm getting penalized, or I'm seeing my friends that are doing the same thing getting penalized. What is the right thing to do? hopefully we'll start seeing some sanity come to the situation and start seeing a little more definition of practices and not these mixed signals like uh, Matt's interview and the penalties that have gone down simultaneously. But thank you guys.
Thanks.
Appreciate you helping us get this thing launched. It's going to be a regular thing from the Meld. And
Don't trust every blog post you read unless it's on the Meld.
Well, that's a good point. For any listeners that are not real familiar with SEO and internet marketing, remember, on the internet you can say anything, and so can anybody else. The fact that you read it on the internet does not make it true. The fact that you hear it from somebody who is well known and supposedly a quote unquote celebrity does not make it true.
Influencer doc.
Yeah, there are some celebrity SEOs out there that I wouldn't pee on if I caught them in flames. So, so take everything with a grain of salt. Use your noggin for something besides a hat rack, and think about it, analyze it. What worked for that site may not work for yours.
Exactly.
I'm going to go off air